Okay, well, thanks first of all very much for inviting me to give a presentation at the launch of this new qualification. People who know me will tell you that I only have two modes of operation, very serious and serious. And today's going to be very serious. To echo Nina Simone, I mean every word of it. And I am actually going to use some notes. So, we live in interesting times. And the imminent arrival of the Teaching Excellence Framework focuses the mind on the quality of teaching. But what does it mean to teach well? What does it mean to teach better? Those are not straightforward questions, though reading government policy documents suggests they are seen as rather trivial. Teaching well is, from a policy perspective, self-evident, giving students the knowledge and skills needed to get a graduate job that enables them to repay their student loan. There are two key problems with this. First, it employs a delivery metaphor for teaching. Now, that was first introduced by Sir Ron Deering in his 1997 report on higher education, when coincidentally he was also chair of the Post Office. But knowledge is not something you can deliver in the way that you can deliver a letter. Second, it embodies a very, very instrumental view of what universities are for, to ensure students, or perhaps better customers in this worldview, get graduate jobs. However, it is a logical impossibility for universities to produce oven-ready graduates that can hit the ground running. To engage in any practice, including learning to be a student, requires considerable learning. We might be able to help our students do that learning more efficiently and effectively, but we cannot prepare them for the multiplicity of differences in practice that exist between workplaces that are on the surface doing similar things. If you walk down the street, you'll find Marks and Spencer's and John Lewis. On the surface, they're doing very similar things, but actually the way they do it is really very different indeed. How do you prepare graduates for those types of jobs? You can't. Furthermore, to reduce a university education to a list of so-called generic employability skills does violence to the idea of a university. One cannot communicate or solve problems effectively without deep knowledge of what is to be communicated or the nature of the problem to be solved. Research tells us that chess players are good at solving chess problems. Physicists are good at talking about physics. Whether they have anything helpful to say about the relationships between colleagues in an office or resolving the strife that inevitably results from putting human beings in office buildings does not follow from their expertise in chess and physics. Many of these so-called employability skills are not skills at all. Teamworking is not a skill. It's a way of organising work. Resilience is at best a personality trait, and the jury is completely out on whether grit can be taught. Here's my favourite one. Flexibility. Flexibility may be a skill for a dancer, but when used in relation to employment usually means turning up on time, doing what you're told and not complaining about it. Higher education is a critical business. It should not be about producing such conformity. Thus, teaching well cannot be about employability skills, but must be about teaching a subject well. And I also wish to echo a very great philosopher, Michael Oakeshott, who argued in his lovely essay, The Idea of a University, which is written much better than any policy document, and I recommend that you read it, and I quote, "A university will have ceased to exist when its learning has degenerated into what is now called research, when its teaching has become mere instruction and occupies the whole of an undergraduate's time, or when undergraduates come with no understanding of the manners of conversation but desire only a qualification for earning a living or a certificate to let them in on the exploitation of the world." I'd like to put Michael Oakeshott into a meeting with Joe Johnson, but unfortunately Michael Oakeshott's been dead for a number of years. For Oakeshott and other philosophers, Education is fundamentally a conversation between the generations of humankind, a conversation about the best that has been thought and said and done. Teaching well is therefore about engaging in a dialogue with our students. What that conversation is about, the knowledge and practices on which subject disciplines are built, is of course not set in aspic. Knowledge is the product of social interaction and changes over time. Joining in the conversation, which is what we want our students to do, means understanding how disciplinary knowledge develops and changes and why. If higher education then is imagined as a conversation between teacher and learner, then what are the implications for learning to teach well? So let's focus for a moment on the concept of learning. Human beings are very, very good at learning. They learn throughout their life, but learning is not the same as education. Many of the young people I've worked with on the streets of Manchester or Hackney have learned all sorts of interesting things. For example, how to sell narcotics in many different currencies. But we probably not see that as educational, even though it's improved their calculating and entrepreneurial skills enormously. The outcome of learning can be simply being aware of not putting your hand too close to the electric hot plate. But what we're interested in is learning that is about understanding and being able to explain. About what Vygotsky called scientific concepts, by which he meant ideas that go beyond common sense. And of course, what we want is to help young people, and not so young people, become critical learners. There's nothing new in this. It is the essence of a liberal education, but we have forgotten it. We need to help our students to use knowledge critically to explain complex phenomena, to read critically, to write well, to construct arguments and to reason. So the teaching we should be concerned with then is how to help our students grasp and manipulate complex ideas and how to develop the academic skills and virtues needed to achieve that. In order to do that, you have to understand that learning is a paradoxical activity. It involves doing, being active, for example, in trying out ideas, but it also requires submission to the rules and ways of going on of an epistemic community of scholars. That's what a discipline is, an epistemic community of scholars. A learner should never be seen as a passive recipient of impressions. A learner from our perspective is somebody who wants to understand something, whether it's the causes of the French Revolution, the nature of knowledge, or the biochemical processes of photosynthesis. Teaching well must therefore involve developing an understanding of students as active learners, not passive recipients of knowledge, as individuals who want to know what and how to think in a discipline, not merely to do. And I realise there are some students at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning who may not wish to do that, but that's what we're trying to do. The important point is this is about conduct, not behaviour. It's about how you go on and why. To teach well, you have to throw away the analogies of teaching and learning based on moulding clay and wax, of minds being like receptacles to be filled or empty rooms that need to be furnished. And that is quite a challenge. It is so easy, I put my hand up, mea culpa, to fall back in telling students stuff and then deceiving ourselves. That is all that is needed to teach well. For the great American philosopher John Dewey, the correct metaphor for education was growth as an individual. Teaching well then needs to be focused on individual growth, where the student is seen as the partner of the teacher, but the partners have different roles. The job of the teacher is to engender a conversation whereby ideas, knowledge, and conduct within an epistemic community are communicated to the students, and the student communicates back to demonstrate their growth in appreciation and utilisation of the knowledge, ideas, and modes of conduct. Thus, teaching well is not just a technical matter of how to use, say, PowerPoint effectively as a learning tool. And in my experience, it's usually used appallingly. Or how to select and sequence knowledge to form a curriculum, or how to provide the feedback students need to make progress. It is fundamentally a moral matter, one that requires a commitment to foster understanding. Such a commitment requires us never to give up, to always search for a better way of helping our students to understand, to help them engage with the conversation. Of course, these are just highfalutin words. In my experience, and obviously we have a large number of such students in the Faculty of Education, is what most beginning teachers want to know is the secret. Tell us the tips of the trade. But that is to reduce teaching to a set of technical functions, trying to render it fail-safe. This is a disastrous misunderstanding, however well-intentioned, of the nature of teaching, which should be dangerous, not safe. Without that feeling of being on the edge, you cannot create the possibility of genuine learning. Of course, there are technical things you need to get right. How to construct a good explanation, for example, which is about the most common criticism that university undergraduates make of the teaching that they receive, that it was not explained well. How to enable students to develop an overview of a field through the use of advanced organisers. Making sure that students understand the questions being asked in a discipline and why they matter, rather than just giving them the answers. Just to give you an example of that, I remember my own experience as an undergraduate studying zoology at Oxford. The invertebrate course was the ultimate survey learning programme. You started at one end of the invertebrate kingdom and you worked your way through to the other end of the invertebrate kingdom. We had the most learned invertebrate specialists teaching us, and they worked extraordinarily hard to produce lectures packed with detail. But as learners, we could not see the wood for the trees. Why did the minutiae that form the basis of most of the lectures matter? How did all this stuff fit together? Fortunately, the university hired a new lecturer. His name was Henry Bennett Clark, and he was one of the best teachers I ever had. And he put it together with us by reducing the detail and giving us an overview of what mattered and why. He brought us into the epistemic conversation by realising in his teaching a journey with us. Henry was a fellow traveller. What this means is that teaching well is not just a moral challenge, but also an intellectual one. To teach well is to be a learner, and being a learner can be both exciting and perplexing. As you follow this new course, you will undoubtedly have aha moments, a feeling of a job well done, of a tricky point conveyed with greater understanding. You'll know when it happens. You just know when you've done that. But you will also have moments of utter frustration when something does not produce the effect that you wanted. These can hurt, and there is always a tendency to blame the learner. Been there, done that. But things not quite working out are also the stimulus for new learning if you let them function in that way rather than beating yourself up. So let me finish with a personal anecdote, and this personal anecdote is from my time as a further education college science teacher. I was working with young people aged 16 who had not done that well at school. They were perfectly capable of learning scientific concepts, but they had not yet done so. As a vehicle, we were using a vocational science program called a BTEC National Diploma. The content was basically the same as A-level, and they had to learn things like calculus and algebra to pass. We never told them the content was the same as A-level, but it was. The biggest challenges for the young people we were working with was, we felt, a lack of confidence and a huge reticence to talk for fear of being seen to be wrong. And you will encounter that in students, I have no doubt. So the first few weeks of the teaching program were geared towards finding out what they already knew, where they were coming from, through a lot of hands-on practical activity. The activity was irrelevant. It was about the talking that was going on around the activity and the fact they were talking to us as their teachers. And they were solving some simple scientific problems. They also had to make presentations to each other and learn to speak with the whole group as well as in small groups. Because remember, learning to speak was one of the key issues we felt these students had. We thought it was going really well, and we could see the change in our students. You could literally see them developing in confidence over a period of about 2 weeks. Then one day, one young man came up to me and said, "Dr. Hayward, I've really enjoyed the last 2 weeks, but when you're going to teach us something, what a reality check." That led us, of course, to rethink what we were doing. Not to throw away the principles that underpin what we were trying to achieve with our students, but how to communicate better what those principles were rather than keeping them hidden. I hope you will enjoy the intellectual journey you face and you enjoy learning with each other how to teach even better. Thank you very much.